Breaking right now on Morning News Now, a critical bridge in Baltimore no longer standing. This incredible video shows the moment a cargo ship rammed into the Francis Scott Key Bridge overnight, causing the entire span to go down. This morning, Maryland's governor is declaring a state of emergency following the bridge collapse. Take a listen to when first responders arrived at the scene.
Be advised, the entire bridge, the entire Key Bridge is in the harbor.
Right now, search and rescue crews are in those frigid waters looking for possible victims. Officials say they're searching for at least 7 people right now. So far, at least 2 people have been rescued. One of them hospitalized. The other was not injured. The Francis Scott Key Bridge, known to many as the Key Bridge, was Baltimore's longest bridge, about 1.5 miles long, and an important part of the Interstate 95 corridor running over the lower Patapsco River. Now investigators are looking into what may have caused this cargo ship collision. Good morning. Good to have you with us. I'm Joe Fryer. Savannah Sellers is on assignment. Earlier this morning, the city of Baltimore gave an update on the rescue operations underway following the bridge collapse.
We were able to remove 2 people from the water. One individual refused service and refused transport. Essentially, that person was not injured. However, there was another individual that's been transported to a local trauma center that is in very serious condition. We are still very much in an active search and rescue posture at this point, and we will continue to be for some time. We have a large area that we have to search. This includes on the surface of the water, subsurface, as well as on the deck of the ship itself.
NBC News correspondent Ryan Nobles has the very latest from the scene.
And good morning from the scene of this bridge collapse in Baltimore. The Francis Scott Key Bridge entrance is right here behind me. It's obviously shut down now as rescue crews continue on what they are describing as a dynamic search and rescue to try and determine just how many people were impacted by this collapse, which happened around 1:30 in the morning. Now, what first responders and officials are telling us is that a container ship that was on its way to Sri Lanka slammed into the base of this bridge, causing it to collapse. And there is video. The moment this happened, you can see the entire bridge collapse into the river. Now, at this point, officials aren't exactly sure how many victims there are to this tragedy. At this point, they've only rescued 2 people, but they've continued a very vigorous search and rescue that started just as soon as the bridge collapsed and has continued on into the morning hours. Now, this situation has been complicated by a number of factors. First is the fact that this happened in the middle of the night. It's pitch black here in Baltimore at the time of this collapse. They've had a difficult time just trying to see exactly what was happening in order to find those victims and rescue them. And the other part of it is the weather. It is cold right now, in the 30s. It was in the 30s overnight when the collapse happened. The water temperature is probably somewhere in the range of 40 to 48 degrees, which means that if someone did fall into the river, they would not be able to survive for a very long period of time. Still, first responders, even at this point, are describing this as a search and rescue effort. They have been in the water all night trying to locate those victims. They're hoping as the sun starts to come up that process will be easier. They have aircraft, helicopters, and airplanes that are flying above the scene, helping them aid in that rescue attempt. But this is going to be a very difficult and lengthy recovery process. This is a main artery in and around the Baltimore and Washington, D.C. area. This is something that thousands and thousands of commuters use every single day. So that is certainly going to complicate things on a workday in this region as the area just waking up now to this tragedy. We'll continue to track and monitor all these developments and update you when we learn more information. For now, though, we'll send it back to you.
All right, Ryan Nobles, thank you. And we will have more on the bridge collapse throughout the morning here on NBC News Now. In other news this morning, the battle over reproductive freedom is back in front of the Supreme Court. At issue is access to the most commonly used abortion pill, mifepristone, which has been widely used for managing abortions and miscarriages in the U.S. for more than 2 decades. At the center of this case, whether the FDA overlooked some serious safety issues when it made mifepristone easier to get, including through mail-order pharmacies. For more on this, we're joined by NBC News Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Delanian and Professor professor of constitutional law and global health policy at Georgetown Law School, Michelle B. Goodwin. Thank you both for joining us. Ken, let's start with you. Take us through what we can expect to hear during today's arguments.
Good morning, Joe. Well, the legal issues in this case have nothing to do with abortion rights, but the implications for abortion rights are profound because as many as half of all abortions in this country are conducted through this pill and other medically approved options. And essentially, this is a case brought by a group of anti-abortion doctors, and it's worked its way here to the Supreme Court. The FDA and the regulated industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the doctors, are both on the same side here, saying that this drug is both safe and effective. At issue were some changes that the FDA made, for example, allowing it to be taken 10 weeks after pregnancy, up from 6 weeks, and allowing only one follow-up doctor visit instead of 3, and then allowing nurse practitioners to prescribe it instead of doctors, and then during the pandemic, allowing mail order distribution of the drugs, which persists to this day, profoundly expanding access. This doctor group, though, saying it impacted safety. That is very much hotly disputed. Most experts say that this drug is perfectly safe and effective, and the FDA is saying, and people who advocate for the FDA are saying that this case really threatens the way that the FDA approves drugs in this country, Joe.
So, Michelle, I mean, the head of the Division of Medical Ethics at NYU Langone Medical Center in New York called this a uniquely important case, saying if the court were to rule against the FDA and the use of mifepristone, it would, quote, clearly bring abortion by pill to an end in this country. Is that what's at stake here?
Well, its implications are quite wide. In the Dobbs decision, the United States Supreme Court said that these matters would be left to states. Given that this was a case that was brought before a federal district court judge, which sided with those plaintiffs who are not all doctors, though they claim themselves to be. One is a dentist and another one has a master's degree in theology. So that's an important point to note just in terms of standing. But because it was brought before a federal district court judge, then it means that it affects the entire country. So in that case, the judge sided with the plaintiffs in very strong terms. What we have before the court now is not a complete removal of mifepristone from the market, but a rollback to what were the pre-COVID standards in terms of its distribution.
So, Ken, let's talk more about safety, which you mentioned. It's important to note the 2 studies cited in a Texas court ruling last year that claimed mifepristone could be harmful. They were later retracted. That was after the publication found, quote, fundamental problems with the study design and methodology, as well as conflicts of interest. How much of a factor is that going to be in this case? Is that a major blow to those who do want to limit access to this pill?
Well, common sense, Joe, tells us it should be. One of those studies was so deeply flawed because it measured emergency room visits after pregnancy and suggested that all of those visits were related to the abortion pill, which later reviewers found was just ridiculous. And so that should have an effect on the case. But unfortunately, we found a recent history in the Supreme Court of just wrong information being bandied about during these arguments. We saw it during gun cases where justices just adopted what were incorrect facts, wrong information, and stated them as they were true and even incorporated them into opinion. So it's really in question here exactly how this is going to play out. One of the big issues, though, before they get to the issue of safety, will be whether these plaintiffs can show that they were harmed. Lawyers call that standing. Whether they actually have standing to say that they were injured, that is one way the Supreme Court could dispose of this case without getting to the central issues, Joe.
And Michelle, I mean, obviously a lot at stake in terms of what kind of impact this ruling could have on reproductive rights, but there are other implications here, including what it could really mean for the future of the FDA, right? Walk us through that.
That's absolutely right. So I teach a course on biotechnology, bioethics, and the law, and have a case book that I've written in this regard. Consistently, over almost a century, the Supreme Court has deferred to the FDA's expertise, to the scientists there, to the research protocols. If, in fact, this case, if the Supreme Court allows this case to go forward in the way in which the plaintiffs would like, then there are repercussions for vaccines. There are repercussions for COVID vaccines, given that there are people who deny that COVID exists and believe that COVID vaccines should not be in the marketplace. There are individuals who believe that children shouldn't be exposed to vaccines like smallpox and polio and believe that they cause harm. Potentially, this could mean that all other FDA FDA judgments and regulations could be challenged by groups who forum shop for particular judges that they believe might defer to them, even if they would not otherwise have standing, such as in this case, where it is incredibly questionable the individuals who've been labeled as doctors, but who do not practice abortion care and are not physicians.
All right. Michelle B. Goodwin and Ken Delaney, thank you both. Appreciate your time this morning. Now, despite being banned in 14 states, some activists have taken it upon themselves to mail abortion pills to women who don't have access. But as NBC News correspondent Dasha Burns explains, that could all change depending on the court's decision.
In this basement in upstate New York, one group is giving abortion access to thousands in states where it's illegal. We're not showing faces because they fear repercussions.
Where's a lot of this medication going?
The medication is going to all the states that the pharmacy will not send to. So I would say the majority are going to Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, Florida, Georgia.
New York is one of 6 states operating under new shield laws when it comes to telehealth, which protect providers doing this from prosecution for now.
How many prescriptions are you mailing out today?
Today we're doing 112.
Dr. Linda Prine prescribes pills from New York City.
What is the scale of this operation?
So before we had the shield law, we were mailing pills to the blue states. After we passed our shield law, the first month we sent about 4,000 pills into restricted states. And now we're up to around 10,000 pills a month.
Anti-abortion rights groups taking notice.
The fact remains that just because you are sitting in California does not mean that you are not violating the laws of Florida, Texas, and 30 other states. So I think they have a false sense of security about this.
But that access in question. The Supreme Court will hear oral arguments in a case that could prohibit prescription of abortion pills via telemedicine and prevent providers from mailing them.
What action do you want the Supreme Court to take?
We hope that the Supreme Court will agree with the 2 lower courts who have already found that it's likely that the FDA broke federal law and its own rules when it brought the abortion drugs to market.
I think what we're talking about is really ways to work around whatever scenario comes up so that we can continue to get these medications to patients.
And it's not just banned states. If the Supreme Court restricts access via telemedicine and via mail, it'll impact states where the medication is legal as well. Doctors tell us it'll result in longer wait times, longer travel times, and more cost for patients seeking care.
All right, Dasha Burns, thank you. It was a consequential day in the New York court system on Monday for former President Trump. He scored a win in his efforts to appeal a nearly $500 million judgment in his New York civil fraud case. He also knows the new start date for his criminal hush money case. Now, in that civil case, a state appeals court reduced Mr. Trump's bond to $175 million and gave him 10 days to come up with the money. As for the criminal case, the former president was in the courtroom here in New York when he learned his hush money trial is going to start on April 15th, just under 3 weeks from now. Get the latest from NBC News Channel correspondent Alice Barr.
A last-minute reprieve for former President Trump in his civil fraud case on a day when the New York Attorney General could have moved to start freezing some of his assets to pay a more than $450 million bond. The former president instead praising an appeals court ruling that slashed that bond to $175 million and bought him another 10 days to post it.
I respect the appellate division for substantially reducing that ridiculous amount of money.
A judge ruled in February that Mr. Trump was liable for fraudulently inflating his net worth to get better loans from banks. His legal team is appealing, arguing there were no victims and the banks were repaid. If he loses that appeal, the New York Attorney General points out he'll still owe the full judgment, saying he's facing accountability for his, quote, staggering fraud.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Also on Monday, the former president learned he will face his first criminal trial beginning April 15th in the New York hush money case. A judge rejected the Trump team's push for a further delay.
And I don't know how you can have a trial that's going on right in the middle of an election.
Former President Trump is accused of falsifying business records to cover up an alleged affair with a porn star in the lead up to the 2016 election. He denies wrongdoing, repeating his claims of a political prosecution as the 2024 election heats up. In Washington, Alice Barr, NBC News.
Let's bring in NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos for more on all this. Another busy day. So let's start with that appeals court decision on the civil judgment. Why did the court decide to cut it by more than half?
They didn't give a lot of reasoning, but Trump's attorneys had argued that the appeals court has a lot of discretion here. They can consider any factor, while the attorney general had said, no, this is an extraordinary circumstances situation. And apparently the defense's argument won the day. So the amount is reduced. And it's interesting because the entire purpose of this bond is to ensure that after the appeals process, years from now, that the defendant doesn't spend all of his money appealing the case and then have nothing to give the plaintiff. So by reducing it to $175 million, that really only guarantees that the attorney general can get $175 million. The rest of that money, if he can't get it today, it's doubtful he'll have it in 2 or 3 years when this appeal is over.
So, yeah, I mean, the New York Attorney General Letitia James says the former president's still on the hook for more than $450 million. Sure. Should he ultimately lose his appeal? What more should we know about that?
Well, then all that would do is the same process as would have started if Donald Trump couldn't have posted a bond, which is execution of judgment proceedings. And these are really difficult, really complex proceedings, even with simple businesses or individuals, with a complex layer of LLCs and other kinds of ownership, and the fact that how much equity does Donald Trump have in these buildings? How much does he still owe on loans? The entire process would not be as simple as just putting a padlock on Trump buildings by Letitia James. It's really a complicated process. Now, whether that starts in the next 10 days or whether it starts in several years, either way, it is a process. I've been involved in these cases. It's not easy.
Another part of this judgment was that he was barred from serving as a public officer for a company. There was a stay put on that yesterday. Does this mean that he can continue to run his companies? How does this kind of play out?
Technically, yes. When you stay that judgment was effectively saying thou shalt not be a head of a company. By staying that, you're effectively saying that, yes, he can continue to do that at least until the stay is lifted. And that's sort of to preserve the status quo while they're on appeal. So it doesn't just preserve that he has to put up that money. It also preserves the equitable remedies. In other words, courts can order you to pay money. They can order you to do or not do things. And all that is a stay of the part of the judgment that orders people to do or not do things, specifically to run companies.
Let's talk about the hush money trial. This is a criminal case. It was initially supposed to start yesterday. We have a delay. Now we know April 15th. How certain are we at this point that this is actually going to start on April 15th? Is there anything else that could delay it?
I'm not, but I'm just following my double down theory that I've been applying since last year, which is, you flip a coin, it's 50-50 every time. I'm just going to say heads every time and say there could be another delay, because about a month ago in this case, all the motions were decided and there was absolutely nothing left to stand in the way of the trial starting this week. And yet, something happened. Something unexpected happened in the form of a couple 100,000 pages of documents from the Southern District of New York. So, I mean, are the odds strong that it will start in a few weeks? Yes, but I said that a month ago about the trial date this week. In ordinary trials, things happen that push off trial dates. These are very consequential, the most consequential criminal trials, 4 criminal cases in American history. They're complex. Things are going to happen. So am I 100% that it'll start in 3 weeks? No, something could happen. Is there a strong possibility? Yeah, at this point, I guess.
We've got 20 days. We'll see what happens in that time. All right, Danny Savalos, thank you so much. Tensions between the United States and Israel are high after the U.S. abstained in yesterday's United Nations Security Council vote, which called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza and the release of all hostages. With 14 countries voting in favor of the resolution, America's abstention meant that the binding resolution was adopted. The UN Secretary General welcomed the move and said the resolution must now be implemented, adding failure to do so would be, quote, unforgivable. But this morning, there are no signs Israel is planning to halt its attacks in Gaza. Prime Minister Netanyahu rebuked the U.S. for not using its veto and canceled the visit of a high-level Israeli delegation to Washington. NBC News international correspondent Raf Sanchez is in Tel Aviv. We're also joined by our White House correspondent Monica Alba. Good morning to both of you. Raf, let's start with you. Walk us through the reaction from Israel and from Hamas to this resolution, and what does happen if it's not implemented?
Joe, good morning. There was applause in the UN Security Council chamber yesterday as that resolution passed, a feeling among diplomats that nearly 6 months into this war, the UN's highest body had overcome its internal divisions, passed a resolution calling both for an immediate ceasefire and the immediate release of the hostages. But, Joe, there is no indication on the grounds that this resolution is going to lead to either of those things happening. As you said, Israel says it will not abide by this resolution, that it will fight on until Hamas is destroyed and until the hostages are released. The Israeli government furious with the Biden administration for not using its veto power to block this resolution from going through. Hamas, for its part, says it welcomes the passage of this resolution, but it is not committing to immediately and unconditionally release the hostages, which is what this resolution calls for. There is no real mechanism in this resolution to punish either Israel or Hamas for non-compliance. The U.S. ambassador to the United Nations claiming this resolution is non-binding. Not really clear what she means by that. UN Security Council resolutions are considered to be international law. But in terms of avenues to really change the facts on the ground, to get those hostages out, to get relief to Palestinian civilians on the brink of famine in Gaza, it is looking like the best pathway remains those ceasefire negotiations underway right now in Qatar. Jeff.
Monica, let's talk about the White House. Why did the U.S. abstain this time, and how is the Biden administration responding to Netanyahu canceling that delegation's visit?
Well, the White House, Joe, said that they were very disappointed and a little bit confused as to why it did lead to that cancellation in the high-profile delegation that was supposed to be coming this week to Washington to discuss all of this. But in terms of their rationale for the abstention, they say it was over some technical omissions in the language, that there wasn't an outright condemnation of Hamas, which they wanted to be in the text, so it's not something that they could vote for, and that is why they decided to abstain. They also claim that this was very similar in language to something they had introduced last week, and so they thought it was close enough to what they themselves were proposing, and so that is why they went with an abstention so that it could pass and it wasn't effectively blocked. But here's a little bit more of how the National Security Council's John Kirby put some of that confusion diplomatically yesterday.
We're kind of perplexed by this. The Prime Minister's office seems to be indicating through public statements that we somehow changed here. We haven't, and we get to decide what our policy is. It seems like the Prime Minister's office is choosing to create a perception of daylight here when they don't need to do that.
So the U.S. insists it has not changed its policy there, and they also said there were some Israeli officials who were already in Washington with the Israeli defense minister, who was in D.C. yesterday for some meetings. He was at the White House, so they're trying to kind of back channel some of those meetings that were going to take place later in the week to be happening now. But the Prime Minister and Israel has said definitively they still plan to go into Rafah with a large-scale offensive, whether it has U.S. support or not. And that was supposed to be the whole point of this meeting that was ultimately canceled, to provide alternatives to that. So it really does leave things at a very tense place, and we're really just not sure what happens next.
I mean, yeah, Monica, where does this leave U.S.-Israeli relations? Is this the lowest point since the war began?
I mean, certainly the rhetoric that is coming out of the Biden administration is a lot more forceful, is a lot more blunt than it was in the days after the October 7th terrorist attacks. But they want it to be very clear, and the White House hasn't changed its position that it still fully backs Israel's right to defend itself. The major shift we've all been watching for, Joe, here is whether something would happen in this war that would condition aid to Israel, which would slow down weapons or not supply them at all, or again, add any conditions to that. And that simply hasn't happened yet, but that's what everybody is waiting to see. And for now, the president has said he will still stand by Israel for its continued fight against Hamas.
All right. Monica Alba, Raf Sanchez, thank you both. Snow and severe storms possible across the east today. Let's get a closer look at your Morning News Now forecast with meteorologist Angie Lastman. Angie, good morning.
Good morning, Joe. We've got a storm system that's caused problems in the past couple of days that continues to be an issue in the next couple of days. We've got the snow that we're tracking across parts of the upper Midwest. We've got the rain stretched from the Great Lakes down to the Gulf Coast, and this system is going to be on the move over the next few days. Here's the deal for today. Notice that front going to bring some shower activity to parts of the Ohio Valley. We'll see storms stretched as far south as the Gulf Coast and into the southeast, and some additional snow falling specifically across parts of northern Minnesota. As we look ahead to tomorrow, that front still working its way to the east. That means the coastal areas of the east are going to continue to see rain. We'll see likely some heavy rain focused across portions of Florida up into the mid-Atlantic. Now, as we look ahead to Thursday, that system, at least the center of the low pressure system, moves offshore, but we'll still be tracking a flood threat across this same region. Outer Banks to Cape Cod looks like we'll see those highest amounts of rain that bring us the concern for some flooding. As far as the snow is concerned, anywhere from 3 to 5 inches possible here as we get through the rest of our next 2 days, Tuesday into Wednesday. We'll slowly start to see that wrapping up. As we head into the evening hours tonight, basically afternoon to evening, a potential for some strong storms to develop, potentially severe as well. We'll see those wind gusts be the main impact for parts of the Great Lakes as well as the Gulf Coast, Mobile, Detroit, Cincinnati, Chicago, all included in that through this afternoon and evening. As far as our rain chances are concerned, they're going to be over the next couple of days, and that means we'll have a chance to pick up some good amounts in some spots. Notice the Big Bend area of Florida. We could see some isolated spots up to 4 inches stretching up into the Carolinas and up into the mid-Atlantic. That's where we'll see those highest amounts. Again, 1 to 3 inches more widespread, but a couple of spots a little higher than that. And on top of that, we've got some strong onshore winds. That accompanied by high tide times means that we could see some potential coastal flooding happening here over the next couple of days. Right now, 16 million people under these flood alerts, and those will last here through at least the day today. We've had a significant rainfall across the same kind of region, and that's partly thanks to El Nino. This is a typical kind of active storm track you see from parts of the south all the way up into the northeast, and that means that we've really started March with some soggy conditions in a lot of these spots. Cape Hatteras, Atlantic City, Providence, all dealing with wettest March on record. We have some top 5 wettest Marches as well, places like New York, Philadelphia, Norfolk, and we'll continue to see that rain in the forecast for the next couple of days, Joe.
How long do we feel El Nino for? Is that something?
Well, we're going to start to see that transition here in the next couple of months,
Okay.
likely as we get into probably summer and beyond, and then we'll transition into a La Nina.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, Angie. Appreciate it. Much more to come here on Morning News Now, including continuing coverage of that bridge collapse in Baltimore. We're going to bring you updates from the scene throughout the hour. Plus, more trouble for rap mogul P. Diddy as the FBI raids 2 of his homes. Stay with us. We'll be right back. We're staying on top of that breaking news out of Baltimore this morning. That is where the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapsed after it was hit by a container ship. You can see the dramatic moment that the bridge fell into the water. Right now, investigators are on the scene and search and rescue efforts are underway. For more, we're joined by NBC News senior correspondent Tom Costello, who's there in Baltimore. Tom, what is the latest from the scene where we should note the fire chief says this is still a search and rescue?
Yeah, this happened at about 1:30 or 1:40 in the morning is when the initial fire call went out, and they are looking for 7 people who are in the water. They believe were in the water. Now, the trouble is the water is about 45 degrees or so. It's about 32 degrees out here on land. Survivability in the water, given the extreme cold and given the hypothermia risk, we're told by experts, maybe an hour. So now we're multiple hours into this event, and yet it is still an all-out search and rescue effort with helicopters in the air searching the water, as well as you would expect, fire department, marine assets, land assets, and the Coast Guard. Let me just get out of the way because I want to show you, if you follow the road, if you will, here, go up the road, you're going to see the bridge there, right? Well, that's it. That's the end of the bridge. It ends right there because it's been cut down by that ship. Now, look to the right, and you're going to see containers on top of a deck. Those are the containers on top of the ship that is stuck. right as you would expect, right in place because of this ongoing emergency. So the question right now very much is, well, exactly how did this happen? Some local authorities are telling us that the ship apparently lost power or lost its ability to navigate. We don't know how that happened, and we don't know who specifically was piloting the ship at the time. Joe, as you know, when you come into major harbors and ports in this country, essentially the captain of the ship, and this is a Singapore flagged vessel, the captain of the ship has to step aside for a local pilot to get on board and navigate through the intricacies of that particular port. So is that what happened here? Was it a local pilot and his or her assistant that was on board on top of that ship deck at the time that they then apparently ran into the pylon here? But among the questions here, how is it possible that a cargo ship could take out such a critical support column for the Francis Scott Key Bridge, which is a critical bridge here in Baltimore? And how could the entire bridge collapse and be so vulnerable to a single pylon being taken out? So an awful lot of questions here. This has been an ongoing massive response effort since about 1:30 a.m. and they are still searching for 7 people. As I mentioned, 2 people have been pulled out of the water. One of them is in a very serious condition at a local trauma center. The other did not need any medical care whatsoever, Joe.
And Tom, we should note Synergy Marine Group, which manages the vessel, said all crew members on the ship, including the 2 pilots, are accounted for. No reports of any injuries. They're fully cooperating. But officials said they're not even able to get on the deck of that ship, which is a key part, of this investigation, maybe even the search and rescue effort, because they don't know if it's safe right now, right?
That's right. They need to assess the damage on that ship before anybody goes on to the ship. So they want to make sure that there's nothing there that might be a risk to rescuers who might get on the ship. They want to make sure it's still seaworthy. It appears to be seaworthy. It's still sitting right there where it hit the bridge. In the meantime, because that they know everybody on that ship seems to be okay, their focus really is very much on the all-out search for the people on the water. And it's not clear if they're looking for bridge construction workers who are doing concrete work on top of the bridge at 1:30 in the morning. Some of them reportedly may have gone into the water, but they also know that there are cars in the water. Their sonar have detected cars in the water. We don't know how many. We don't know how many people might be in those cars. An awful lot of unanswered questions. At 1:30 in the morning, it is pitch black out there on the water. And so immediately, the first teams on the scene were really struggling just to get their bearings, figure out exactly what they were dealing with, where people might be, and how many people might be in the water.
All right. Tom Costello, appreciate your reporting throughout the morning. We'll check back with you with any updates. Another story making headlines this morning. NBC News has learned that music mogul Sean Diddy Combs is at the center of a federal investigation, according to a source familiar with the matter, after authorities raided his homes in Los Angeles and Miami yesterday. The source says Combs is facing allegations involving sex trafficking, sexual assault, illegal narcotics, and firearms. 3 law enforcement sources familiar with the warrant say that Homeland Security officials also seized phones from Combs yesterday in Miami before he was scheduled to depart for a trip to the Bahamas. It's unclear if he actually made that trip. Combs' representatives did not respond to NBC News' request for comment. It's the latest development after several women filed lawsuits against Combs, alleging that he sexually assaulted them. Diddy's former longtime girlfriend, Cassie, filed the first lawsuit in November and settled with him just 1 day later. At the time, Combs' attorney said that the settlement was in no way an admission of wrongdoing. Just last month, a producer who worked for Combs sued, alleging that Combs sexually harassed, drugged, and threatened him for more than a year. Combs has denied the allegations in all of those lawsuits. Let's bring in NBC News contributor and analyst Jim Kavanaugh. He's also a retired ATF special agent in charge and former hostage negotiator for the ATF. So, 4 law enforcement sources told NBC News that federal agents with Homeland Security investigations executed the search warrants. What do we know about this branch of DHS?
Well, they're called HSI, Homeland Security Investigations, and basically they grew it out of the old Customs Service special agents and immigration agents, because the Department of Homeland Security, when it was created, took over those functions, customs and immigration combined. And so what HSI does is basically they, stop the illegal trade in things and people, mostly that are coming across the border. But they are experts in sex trafficking and human trafficking, which often, Joe, involves smuggling of immigrants to exploit them. So they're experts at those laws, and they're very good at child pornography and people who travel for child sex exploitation. And that's likely why they became involved in the case with Mr. Combs, because there's allegations of sexual exploitation or sex trafficking. So, that's probably why they're involved and they're leading the investigation.
So what would lead authorities to conduct raids of this size and searches like this? What is it investigators are looking for even?
Yeah, in a sex trafficking case, things might have happened months or years ago. They're looking for, electronic data, computers, cell phones, and records that may prove the allegations of sexual trafficking or assault. Of course, there could be allegations involving other commodities, too. Sometimes that happens, drugs or illegal weapons. But it has to be addressed in the search warrant. So when the affidavits for the search warrants at both locations are unsealed in public, then you have to look and see what exactly was described to be seized by the court. Mm-hmm.
And Jim, the fact that they're conducting raids right now, does that tell us where they might be in the investigation and what might be the next steps then?
Yes, I mean, they feel like they have something they might can charge. Criminal activity definitely, they believe, was afoot. They have to provide that affidavit to a federal judge, a magistrate judge. He allows the searches to go forward under his authority. Then they collect the evidence, and then they look at the evidence. Now, charges don't always come after search warrants. They may not find any evidence of what was alleged, or they may find some. So then the investigators at HSI and the U.S. attorneys, prosecutors will have to look at the facts and decide if there's a chargeable offense that's actually provable.
All right, Jim Kavanaugh, appreciate your expertise this morning. Thanks so much for joining us. Coming up, we are going to have continuing coverage of that breaking news. We're going to take you to Baltimore for the latest on rescue efforts following this morning's bridge collapse. Stay with us. You're watching Morning News Now. We are continuing to follow breaking news out of Baltimore this morning. That's where the Francis Scott Key Bridge has collapsed after it was hit by a ship. The dramatic collapse was caught on camera, as you see there. Right now, we know rescue operations are underway. It's unclear how many people may have fallen into the water, but officials say they're looking for at least 7 people at the moment. We do know 2 people have been pulled from the water. One was not hurt, but the other has been hospitalized with serious injuries. Now, we've learned the ship was just leaving the port en route to Sri Lanka when it collided with the bridge around 1:30 this morning. The bridge, which is about 1.5 miles long, carries I-695 over the Patapsco River in southeast Baltimore. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg tweeted this morning that he spoke with Maryland's governor and Baltimore's mayor to offer federal support following the incident. We will continue to follow this breaking story as it develops throughout the morning, bring you any new information as soon as we learn it. Turning to medical news, today is Diabetes Alert Day in the U.S. It's a reminder of the dangers associated with diabetes. More than 1 in 3 adults in the U.S. are pre-diabetic. That means you have higher than normal blood sugar and you're at risk for developing type 2 diabetes. Dr. Christopher Holliday is the director of the Division of Diabetes Translation for the CDC and joins us now with more. Dr. Holliday, thanks for joining us. Talk more about some of the basics here. 2 types of diabetes, type 1 and type 2. Remind us what the differences are.
Yes, good morning, and thank you for having me. So type 2 diabetes is essentially a lifestyle condition in which someone may have a little bit of extra body weight, maybe not getting the requisite amount of physical activity per week, and may be eating a poor diet. And that leads to insulin resistance. It allows people to progress to type 2 diabetes. And the precursor of that is prediabetes, which is a signal that they're at high risk for this serious condition. Type 1 is more related to the body's ability to produce insulin and to break down the food that we consume so that it can be turned into fuel. And so with Diabetes Alert Day, our role here at CDC is really to raise awareness about prediabetes, to make sure that people know where they stand and their risk by going to doihaveprediabetes.org, taking a simple 1-minute risk test, and knowing where they stand. And if they have a high score on this risk test, they can talk to their doctor about getting a blood test to verify that they have prediabetes.
Yeah, I was about to say, beyond going online to do that test, what are the best ways to know how at risk you are?
Yeah, it's interesting because there are very simple ways to know that whether you might be at risk. The best way is to take this simple risk test. But there's also, if you have a mother, father, sister, or brother, close family relative that has type 2 diabetes, if you have a largely sedentary lifestyle, if your diet has not been the best, and if you are over the age of 45, if you're male is another risk factor. So if any of these sound like they might be you might be at risk for type 2 diabetes or have prediabetes.
What are the best ways to prevent it from turning into type 2 diabetes? I mean, this is something that you can change, right?
The good news is that prediabetes is reversible through simple lifestyle changes, making sure you get the requisite 20 minutes of physical activity per day, that you eat a healthy diet, and that you keep an eye on your weight. And so your weight is the pretty much the weight around your trunk or in your abdomen area is what is most serious to watch. And if you can make these modest lifestyle changes, you're likely to prevent progression to type 2 diabetes.
All right, Dr. Christopher Holliday, some important information. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate it. Staying on health news, time now for our weekly mental health check-in. A new book out today by an influential author argues that phones have caused the epidemic of bad mental health we're seeing in kids. Plus, how reading or bibliotherapy can improve your mental health. Here to help us break it down is licensed marriage and family therapist, Dr. George James. Dr. James, always good to have you with us. So we've talked a lot on this show about some of the unhealthy mental health side effects of smartphones. Now we have a social psychologist named Jonathan Haidt in his new book, The Anxious Generation. He's actually suggesting kids should avoid them altogether just because of how much anxiety they're causing. That is a tough call in this digital age. Do you really think that's the solution? Is there a happy medium there to help kids out?
Yeah, good morning, Joanne. And in this book, he really just highlighting all the things that have happened since 1995 and really since 2007 with the smartphone and how we are, as a society, really pulled and addicted and our teens are overwhelmed by it. So his suggestions are not to give your child a phone until 10 or older, not to start them on social media until 16 or older, to have schools that don't have phones, and really to allow kids to overcome their anxiety on their own. It's really hard, but if we can delay some of these, if we can interact some more, I think it could take away some of the comparisons and our young folks being overwhelmed by just phones and social media and all the things that can increase their anxiety.
We hear the research that says even when kids just take a break from their phones, suddenly their mental health improves, their anxiety goes down. So let's talk more about technology. Artificial intelligence is continuing, of course, to develop. Chatbots can now generate the sort of statements that therapists are trained to deliver to help with our mental health struggles. This sounds a little scary to me, Dr. James. What are your thoughts on this one? I mean, can this make therapy affordable, or is this something you just need to avoid?
You know, as a therapist for over 20 plus years, I think that technology is something that we can introduce and include, but I don't think it will ever really replace what can happen working with someone one-on-one. But what these bots are able to do is to help people in a moment, give them some advice, especially if they're not able to reach a therapist because of the demand or not able to get maybe that connection they need right away. But it should never replace going to see your own therapist. And maybe even if that means a wait, that can be the best solution for you.
Last but not least, let's talk about what researchers are calling bibliotherapy. It can actually help us improve our mental health. Break this one down for us. What kind of books should we be reading if we want to try and give this a try?
You know, bibliotherapy is really just being able to read books that might somehow help us. It might give us a framework. It might help us to think about how we interact with our friends and partners. It might encourage us to think about who we are. And this is something that many therapists, including myself, like to do, is maybe recommend a book to read. So if there's a book out there that you like, or a book that's helping you to be a better person, that's a part of bibliotherapy. So reading is great, and literary fiction is one of those areas that can help us to be better because we can see ourselves, but through other characters. So I encourage you, read some books encourage, be able to grow who you are through the characters you see in these books.
And we see the definition of bibliotherapy right there. All right, Dr. James, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Some useful advice as always.
Thank you so much.
Coming up, speaking out, Dodgers star Shohei Otani addressing allegations against his former interpreter for the first time. We're going to bring you the latest next on Morning News Now. We are staying on top of breaking news out of Baltimore this morning. That is where the Francis Scott Key Bridge has collapsed after it was hit by a cargo ship. Sunlight is giving us a better idea of the damage. From the air, you can see the twisted metal sticking out of the Patapsco River. Officials say a search and rescue effort is still underway and that sonar has detected vehicles underwater. Right now, we know at least 7 people are missing, but officials say that number could grow. Officials also confirm there were contractors working on the bridge. We do know at least 2 people have been rescued from the water, one of them in serious condition at the hospital. We have teams on the scene working to get more information, and we will bring you updates as soon as they become available. We're staying on top of that breaking news out of Baltimore. The Francis Scott Key Bridge collapsed early this morning after it was hit by a cargo ship. You can see the dramatic moment. The bridge just came crashing down into the river below. Search and rescue efforts have been underway throughout the morning. Officials say they're right now looking for at least 7 people, but that number could grow. Right now, we know the ship was heading to Sri Lanka when authorities say it apparently lost power or lost its ability to navigate. Company that manages the ship said that all crew members were accounted for. There were no injuries or any oil pollution. We're going to stay on top of this breaking story and bring you any developments as they come in throughout the morning. Finally this hour, 2 overdue books have finally been returned to a Kentucky library after nearly a century. Today, the books are not worth much, but the story of the immigrant family behind them, you could say that is priceless. We get the story from reporter Sean Bodie of our Louisville affiliate, Wave News.
Miriam Perlmutter's grandchildren can only imagine what she'd say today. The Russian Jewish immigrant checked these books out of the Louisville Free Public Library 98 years ago. The first, a Russian English language guide.
The number of books she checked out as an immigrant that could barely speak the language at some point is a testament to what it can do to lift people up.
This book of musical composers was checked out by Miriam's son Morris, later known as Morris King. His son, Michael King, side by side with his cousins, handed the books back on Monday.
He would be so happy that we're all together. He would be so happy that the books were returning. He'd be so happy that he was on television and that his name was continuing.
King's father was born in 1909 in the Ukraine. They moved to the United States shortly thereafter before ending up in Louisville, where King quickly developed a love for music and books, and he's got the receipts to prove it.
King was enamored with music, making a living with his violin. Generations later, it's a shared passion.
Whenever we get together, we still play classical music together.
In his grandmother's native Yiddish tongue, Michael King says, in a way, today is what life is all about.
Sheping Nachas means to take pride in a family doing something. It's pride in your family. I think that she would derive immense pleasure from seeing the family together.
Delinquent fees for these books would have been hundreds of dollars. The library, however, stopped collecting in 2021. The books will head to a special collection behind glass.
Our thanks to Sean Bodie from our Louisville, Kentucky affiliate Wave News for that story. That's going to do it for this hour of Morning News Now. Stay with us. The news continues right now. Top of the hour, let's get right to that breaking news, the latest out of Baltimore. You are looking at live pictures of the Francis Scott Key Bridge, a critical travel artery. Actually, this is images taken earlier this morning. It was reduced to rubble. Here's what we know at this hour. Overnight, shocking live stream video, as you can see here, captured the cargo ship striking one of the bridge's support columns, immediately causing it to buckle. The bridge itself lies just southeast of Baltimore Center at the mouth of its bustling inner harbor and carries a major stretch of highway. Moments ago, city officials confirmed that so far they've rescued 2 people from the water, 1 in serious condition. They're searching for at least 7 more.
We are still very much in an active search and rescue posture at this point. We have a large area that we have to search. This includes on the surface of the water, subsurface, as well as on the deck of the ship itself.
Investigators are focusing on what exactly caused the tragedy, though we have heard from the White House this morning with an official saying there is no indication of any criminal intent. Good morning. Thank you for joining us. I'm Joe Fryer. Savannah's on assignment. Let's get right to our Tom Costello for the latest.
This morning, a stunning bridge collapse at the Port of Baltimore.
The entire Key Bridge is in the harbor.
The Francis Scott Key Bridge plunging into the water overnight after it was hit by a cargo container ship.
I wanted to know what the bang was. Ship hit the Key Bridge, sinking. The bridge is gone. Holy hell.
Video shows smoke coming from the ship before it hit the bridge. The bridge is normally a major artery spanning the Patapsco River, and though the collapse happened in the early morning hours, 1:30 a.m., video shows cars crossing moments before the ship hits. The traffic then paused, but vehicles were still on the bridge as it then crumbled into the water. Fire department and Coast Guard teams rushed to the scene, rescuers searching the water overnight.
Still very much in an active search and rescue posture. Our sonar has detected the presence of vehicles submerged in the water.
The ship is an almost 950-foot container vessel called Dali, headed from Baltimore to Sri Lanka. The Synergy Marine Corporation saying it collided with the bridge pillar, and all of its crew members, including the two pilots, have been accounted for. The ship reportedly lost power while in the water. This morning, with the sun rising, search teams continue looking for any survivors in the water as the Baltimore area reels from a major collapse.
Our thanks to Tom Costello for that report. For more on how the weather is impacting search and rescue efforts, let's bring in meteorologist Angie Lassman. She's following the conditions. I know everything we're hearing is that the water temperature seems to be in the 40s, right?
Yeah, quite cold, honestly, Joe. And when we're talking about the exact water temperature right at the bridge, we don't have sensors at the bridge measuring that water temperature, but we have a couple to the north and one to the south. And it looks like water temperatures coming in around 48 degrees. On top of that, air temperatures at the time of the fall of the bridge, we're talking mid 40s to upper 40s. Those temperatures will rise here as the day goes on, but with water temperatures into the upper 40s, we're talking about loss of motor skills within about 5 minutes. And as that time goes on, in between the 30 to 60 minute range, we'll start to see exhaustion and likely unconsciousness, survivability without proper protection as far as clothing and things like that. 1 to 3 hours is what we look at with water temperatures between 40 to 50 degrees. On top of that, the good part of the weather that we're dealing with for search and rescue efforts is that we don't have rain in the forecast. They're not going to have to deal with those conditions on top of what they're already dealing with in that area. But of course, timing critical with temperatures in the water and the air temperatures ranging into those 40s over the next couple of hours, Joe.
Thank you so much for that. Appreciate it. In other news this morning, the issue of abortion is back in front of the Supreme Court. Today, the justices will hear oral arguments as they weigh whether to roll back the FDA's move that made an abortion pill easier to obtain. NBC News senior legal correspondent Laura Jarrett has more.
This morning, the U.S. Supreme Court wading back into the battle over reproductive freedom with a case that could jeopardize access to the most commonly used abortion pill, mifepristone, putting patients and doctors on edge.
We are all in fear of what this could do for our profession and our patients.
Abortion rights advocates planning to rally at the High Court Tuesday, worried about how the justices could roll back access to a pill that's been available for managing abortions and miscarriages in the U.S. for more than 2 decades.
The risks are extremely minimal. It's extremely safe. I am using mifepristone on a daily basis as an OBGYN. That is how common this medication is used in my practice.
At issue, a legal morass of FDA regulations that made the drug easier to obtain, a process the Biden administration and drug manufacturer maintain was based on science. But the advocates that sued to ban the medication allege the FDA ignored safety risks.
We are asking the Supreme Court to hold the FDA accountable for violating the law to the detriment of women's health. That means restoring those common sense safety standards that were in place for 16 years.
The legal battle came to a fever pitch nearly a year ago when a federal judge in Texas issued a sweeping order invalidating the FDA's longtime approval of mifepristone, effectively banning the medication nationwide. The Supreme Court quickly stepped in to put that ruling on hold while the lawsuit played out, which is why the pill has remained on the market for now. But last summer, a federal appeals court decided to limit access to mifepristone in significant ways, like making it unavailable by mail and restricting who can prescribe it. Changes which, if upheld by the justices, would have a major impact, particularly for women in red states, where abortion is largely now outlawed.
That was Laura Jarrett reporting. More legal news now. A critical day in court yesterday for former President Trump and some of the legal fights that he's facing. The state appeals court reduced his nearly $500 million bond in his New York civil fraud case down to $175 million. This came as Mr. Trump learned that his hush money trial is set to get underway now next month. NBC's Garrett Hake joins us from Washington with the latest. Garrett, good morning.
Hey, Joe. Good morning. Yeah, definitely a mixed bag for Mr. Trump's day in court yesterday, with one judge giving him a bit of financial breathing room, while another slammed the door on his legal maneuvering, setting the date for an historic trial Mr. Trump had hoped to avoid.
This morning, Donald Trump now has a trial date in the New York City hush money case he'd long fought to see delayed or dismissed outright.
This is election interference. That's all it is. Election interference. And it's a disgrace.
The judge setting an April 15th trial date for Mr. Trump in what would be the first criminal trial of a former president in history. The presumptive GOP nominee lashing out, baselessly blaming President Biden for his New York State prosecution on 34 felony counts of falsifying business records related to alleged hush money payments to porn star Stormy Daniels.
I don't know how you can have a trial like this in the middle of an election, a presidential election. And this is a Biden trial. These are all Biden trials.
But even as Mr. Trump sat stone-faced in a Manhattan courtroom, a New York appeals court judge was handing him a victory in another case. The appeals court cutting the bond owed by the former president by more than half to $175 million as he appeals the nearly $500 million civil fraud judgment against him.
I respect the appellate division for substantially reducing that ridiculous amount of money.
Mr. Trump saying he'll have the cash within the new 10-day deadline imposed.
Hey, now that the bond's been reduced, are you going to start putting money into your campaign?
Yeah.
You haven't done that since 2016.
Well, first of all, it's none of your business, I mean, frankly. But I might do that.
The Trump campaign using the appeals court ruling to fundraise for both their political and legal accounts, texting supporters, quote, huge victory, but now is not the time to celebrate.
If you were a Trump supporter and you clicked that donation link, 10 cents of every dollar you give goes to a fund that helps pay Mr. Trump's legal bills. Now, it probably can't be used for the judgments against him, but Trump argues that the legal and political are all interrelated in this campaign and in the cases against him. And when it comes to raising money, they certainly are.
All right, Garrett, thank you so much. Heavy rain expected from Florida to Maine in the coming days. For more details, let's bring in Angie Lastman again for your Morning News Now forecast. Hey, Angie, good morning.
Hey there, Joe. We've got a whole lot of rain and some additional snow for folks across parts of the upper Midwest that we're going to deal with in the next few days. The same storm system that has been causing trouble for us continues to be an issue. Here's the deal today. We've got the rain across parts of the Great Lakes stretching back into the Midwest. Notice there's some additional snow that I mentioned that's going to fall, especially across parts of Minnesota. We've got that rain stretch from the Ohio Valley down through parts of the Gulf Coast, and it'll continue to shift to the east as the day goes on. We'll deal with the rain through that same region today. We'll also see the potential for some stronger storms to develop. I'll show you those areas here in a moment. But notice by the time we get into tomorrow, still dealing with this same storm system. It looks like most of that rain will hug the coast. Florida up into portions of New England. We'll see some of that rain, but the heaviest of it will be from basically Virginia down through the panhandle of Florida. As far as the snow, we'll start to see that wrap up for folks as we get into tomorrow, and we'll be looking at drier conditions as far into those portions of the Midwest and parts of the Ohio Valley, but still along the coast, seeing some of that heavy rain. It looks like the model takes us our low offshore by the time we get later into the daylight hours of Thursday, but we'll still be dealing with a flood threat from the Outer Banks up to Cape Cod. We'll be concerned about that with those strong onshore winds and the potential for some coastal flooding. As far as the snow is concerned, another 3 to 5 inches possible. Notice this is mostly in portions of the upper peninsula of Michigan. We've got parts of Wisconsin and Minnesota included in that. Again, 3 to 5 inches are going to be those higher amounts amount, and then we'll start to see the snowfall wrapping up in that region. The strong storms that I mentioned, we've got two spots that we're closely watching, one across parts of the Great Lakes. We've got Cincinnati, Detroit, and Chicago included in that. We've got another area that we're watching along the Gulf Coast, Mobile to Tallahassee included in that. It looks like the biggest threat is going to be those wind gusts, but of course we can't rule out the potential for isolated tornadoes and maybe some hail as we get into the afternoon and evening hours tonight. Rainfall, big concern over the next couple of days. It's not just today. This is going to last through Thursday that we'll have to be dealing with the rain, as I showed you, that system moving to the east. So places like Jacksonville, Charleston to Tallahassee, down towards Tampa, we could see anywhere from a half an inch up to 3 inches of rain over the next couple of days. And on top of that, we'll likely see some isolated spots with even more rain, maybe 4 inches, 5 inches, all possible here in some isolated locations. As we look up into the Northeast and New England, anywhere from 1 inch to 2 inches is going to be on the higher end of those amounts. I mentioned the coastal flooding, and we're watching for some of those alerts here as we get through the day today. We've got 16 million people included in that. We'll see those gusty onshore winds along with the high tide bring the potential for this coastal flooding. Norfolk, Washington, D.C., Atlantic City, New York, all included in these here as we go through the next couple of days. So we'll be watching that closely. And if you're looking for the warm weather, well, it's not in the northern plains. We've got 20s for Bismarck, 30s for Minneapolis today. We peak into the mid 40s in Denver, running below normal across that region. We look towards a little farther towards the east, and we're closer to normal in places like Pittsburgh, but that cooler air starts to spread a little farther to the east as we get into tomorrow. Chicago hits a high of just 43 degrees. By the time we get into late week, we'll start to turn back to more typical kind of temperatures. Washington, D.C. goes from the upper 50s on Thursday to the mid 60s on Saturday. That'll be a nice change for folks there. Mid 50s on Friday in New York and upper 50s by Saturday. Places like Cleveland will be thrilled to go from the 40s to the 50s.
I think I've forgotten what normal is for late March.
It's a relative term these days.
Is it 20 degrees? Is it 80? It's somewhere in between, right?
Exactly.
All right, Angie, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Much more to come on this hour of Morning News Now. We will go back to Baltimore for the latest on search and rescue efforts there after a major bridge collapsed earlier this morning. Stay with us. That's next. We are following breaking news out of Baltimore. That's where the Francis Scott Key Bridge has collapsed after a cargo ship crashed into one of its pillars. The bridge collapse caught on camera, as you see right here. The more than mile-long structure just crumbled into the water. The ship was leaving Baltimore for Sri Lanka when authorities say it apparently lost power or lost its ability to navigate. Authorities now say they're looking for upwards of 7 people, noting that number could change. At least 2 people were already rescued from the water, one in serious condition, the other not hurt at all. Officials say sonar detected multiple vehicles submerged in that chilly water. Maryland Governor Wes Moore has declared a state of emergency, says that he was working to get federal resources deployed. Kevin Heaslip joins us now. He's the director of the Center for Transportation Research and professor of civil and environmental engineering at the University of Tennessee. Thank you so much for joining us. Just first of all, your reaction to what we're seeing this morning, especially the video that shows the moment that this collapse happened.
It's a devastating event, and this is something that can only happen when you have a large ship. The ship can hold 10,000 tractor trailers worth of cargo. So the immense weight that it had as it moved into that bridge support, there's really nothing like it that could cause that sort of immense, reaction.
In 2007, I was working in Minneapolis. That's when the 35W bridge collapsed there. That was not caused by any sort of external issue. There was no ship that hit it or anything like that. After months of investigation, they learned that was a design issue, that decades earlier, the design of the bridge was flawed, and finally time caught up with it, and that's why the bridge collapsed here. I think a lot of people are stunned looking at this video to see that all it took was this ship clipping one area of the bridge and the entire thing went down. That seems concerning to people. Is it surprising to you, or can it be that easy for an entire bridge structure to go down?
It's not an easy event. If you took a speedboat and hit it hit that support with it, it wouldn't make a dent to the bridge. But having this giant cargo ship with the weight and the immense amounts of cargo that's on it, that's so much energy that gets put into the support of that structure, and that structure was built to withstand many different types of hazards, but a fully loaded cargo ship is not something that we could design for. If we designed bridges for that, then the cost would be so high that we wouldn't be able to have any bridges.
Clearly, the search and rescue operation is a priority right now, but we know that the investigation into how this happened is probably getting underway right now, too. What is it that investigators are going to be looking at first and foremost to try and figure out why this happened?
Well, the contributing factors of what happened with the ship, now there's reports that the ship lost power, and that is seemingly the contributing factor. But as far as the bridge goes, there may be ways to, in the future, maybe try to warn people that this sort of thing could happen. But we cannot design our bridges to withstand the impact from a fully loaded cargo ship.
Kevin Heaslip, thank you so much for your time and your expertise this morning. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Now, the latest effort to limit teenagers' access to social media. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed a bill into law that would ban social media accounts for kids 14 and under while enhancing parental consent. NBC News senior national correspondent Stephanie Gosk has more.
This morning, a growing push to keep kids off social media. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signing a bill into law banning children under the age of 14 from joining what it calls addictive social media platforms and requiring a parent's consent for teens aged 14 and 15 to sign up. Florida legislators say they're concerned about online predators and teens' mental health.
A child in their brain development doesn't have the ability to know that they're being sucked in to these addictive technologies and to see the harm and step away from it.
It can also get addicting.
It's just like a really hard app, I think, to get out of, because I feel like once I start, I can't stop.
Florida joining an increasing list of states, including Arkansas, Utah, and Ohio, working to limit teens' access to social media.
I'm worried that he is going to be exposed to violent things, to sexual things, to bullying, to peer pressure.
Sarah Slinsky is a Florida mother of an 11-year-old boy. She's worried about what her son is exposed to online, while also sharing concerns about government overreach.
You think the legislation goes too far?
I think that it is the government stepping in and saying, we know what's best for your children better than even you do.
Several states cracking down on access have faced lawsuits from NetChoice, a trade group that represents TikTok, Meta, Snapchat, and other big tech companies. Now Florida could be next, with NetChoice calling its law unconstitutional, telling NBC News there are better ways to protect families without violating their freedoms. The latest legislation comes as kids are increasing their social media use. According to the U.S. Surgeon General, children between 12 and 15 who spend more than 3 hours per day on social media doubled their risk of depression and anxiety.
Stephanie Goss, thank you for that. The Florida law calls on app companies to verify users' ages. We reached out to social media companies for any response. Meta, which owns Facebook and Instagram, says it's not commenting on this specific law, but it believes responsibility should be on app stores for restricting teenagers' access to certain apps. TikTok told us it has safeguards, including age-related features, parental controls, and an automatic 60-minute time limit for users under 18. In California, some small businesses have grown so tired of shoplifters, they've started posting videos of the thefts online. Some posts include names, even the alleged culprit's personal information. Here's NBC News correspondent Stephen Romo.
Fed up with thefts, these California small businesses are taking matters into their own hands, posting videos of the alleged shoplifters on social media.
And I was just shocked, like it happened back to back. I was really upset.
Chandler Tang, owner of Postscript, a gift shop in San Francisco, says she posted alleged shoplifters last month after being targeted twice in just 1 week. She posted both incidents, hoping her followers could help her identify them, though she had no luck.
We want to alert our community and get support especially knowing that like the police might not be able to help us.
Kitson clothing stores in LA, once known as a celebrity hotspot of the 2000s, takes it one step further, not just using social media for help identifying suspects, but posting what the store believes to be their names, social media accounts, and other personal information unrelated to the incident in at least 2 instances, even after getting paid or getting the goods returned. A potentially risky move.
If you imply that somebody committed a crime and that's false, that will usually make you liable for defamation.
The LAPD says it is currently investigating a case involving Kitson alleged shoplifting, but would not provide details on specific cases. Owner Fraser Ross says he does it in part to alert other small businesses.
Armed guards, we don't have that. So all businesses have to be aware of these shoplifters. And if they come into your complex, you need to be on top of them.
The police can't really help us. And there's a certain law where, it has to be a certain amount of items stolen.
That law, known as Prop 47, was passed in 2014 and increased the amount of which shoplifting could be prosecuted as a felony from $400 to $950.
By moving the dollar amount upward for qualifying felonies, you make more crimes misdemeanors. And misdemeanors alone are often crimes that police simply aren't that interested in investigating.
The law has many critics, including some elected leaders in San Diego, currently gathering signatures to try to reform it.
Prop 47 has failed us, especially in retail theft, where theft now is really been almost decriminalized.
As for Kitson and Postscript, posting about alleged thefts has not helped deter shoplifting.
We do our year-end shrinkage. Our shrinkage is up.
I don't know if it's deterred shoplifting, but we've had a lot of people come in because of the TikTok and because of all the media. We've had a ton of people come in.
Tang saying more than 60 people have been in just over the past few weeks after seeing her posts about the thefts.
Did I do the right thing? I want to say yes. We're representing the business, and are we putting these shoplifters, in harm's way? And it's just there's so many elements.
All right, thanks to Stephen Romo for that report. Coming up, we are going to bring you the very latest out of Baltimore this morning, where one of the city's vital bridges collapsed overnight. Well, the latest on what we know at this hour. Stay with us. That's next. Back now with our top story this morning. A bridge in southeast Baltimore collapsing after it was struck by a container ship. Interstate 695, a vital roadway there, runs over that bridge. Now, this happened just after 1:30 this morning Eastern time at the Francis Scott Key Bridge over the Patapsco River. 2 people have been rescued from the water so far. Officials say this is still a search and rescue operation with at least 7 people still missing. NBC's Ryan Nobles joined us from the scene with more. So, Ryan, what's the latest on the ground when it comes to this search and rescue, and anything more we're learning about what may have happened to cause this collision earlier?
Well, we know what caused the collision, and that is that a massive container ship that was leaving the Baltimore harbor smashed in to this bridge and almost instantly collapsing it. And at that time, we do know that there was an unspecified amount of people on the bridge that fell into the water, and it began a frantic search and rescue effort. The bridge collapsed around 1:30 this morning. It was the dark of night, and that has certainly complicated the effort by search and rescue teams as they try and figure out how many people are in the water and how they're able to get them out and rescue them and keep them safe. And it's no easy task. The water temperature is in the 45 to 48 degree range, so frigid water, water that a human being cannot survive in for very long. So that's why there is that frantic search that continues. And while they begin that process, something that was made a little bit easier as the sun started to come up, they still have had a very difficult time locating other survivors. As you rightly point out, so far only 2 people have been rescued. We are expecting an additional update from officials here at around 9:30, where we could get a better idea as to how the search and rescue effort is going. Joe.
At some point this morning, we expect to hear from Maryland Governor Wes Moore, who has declared a state of emergency. Do we know, are we hearing anything at all from the White House or the Biden administration?
Yeah, we know the president has been briefed. His transportation secretary, Pete Buttigieg, has also made it clear that the administration is directly involved in this process. At this point, the White House is ruling out anything nefarious, as they describe it. So that would indicate a terrorist attack or anything along those lines is something that they say that at least in the initial stages of this investigation, they don't believe took place. This just appears to be some sort of serious issue that took place with this container ship, be it mechanical or some sort of pilot error. That's going to be part of the investigation right now. But this is something the White House is directly engaged in. And as you point out, Governor Wes Moore, who we do know is on the ground here and near the bridge, meeting with officials and folks from the Coast Guard, has said that he is going to reach out for federal assistance to begin this recovery process, which will be lengthy. In addition to the search and rescue, as you said before, Joe, this is a major traffic artery in the Baltimore area, and it is going to take some time for it to be rebuilt.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, of course, our thoughts are with those who need to be rescued, those who are missing, the search and rescue teams out there. But help us understand just how vital this roadway is to this area. We know, I mean, months are likely going to go by without it being in service.
Yeah, I mean, it's 8:30 in the morning, Joe, here in the Baltimore area. And normally this road behind me would be packed with commuters heading into work or school or wherever the case may be. This is a mile and a half of roadway into one of the most densely populated areas in America. Traffic in the Baltimore, Washington, D.C. area is legendarily difficult. And this is one of the main arteries that allowed people to get around this region. So this is going to cause traffic headaches for weeks, maybe even a year or longer, depending on how long it takes for them to clean up and to rebuild this bridge. I can tell you when I was coming in very early this morning at around 4:30, there were already signs around the area warning people to stay away from this bridge and stay away from this portion of 695. So this is a major, major impact on the entire area, in addition to the potential loss of life, which search and rescue crews are still hoping to avoid. Joe.
Ryan, can you also tell us what we are learning about the ship this morning? I know earlier today authorities said they didn't feel safe putting anyone on that ship yet till they knew that it was safe to do so.
Yeah, so we do know that the crew was headed to Sri Lanka, that all the crew that were on board that ship have been accounted for, and they are all safe. The ship itself is still in the river right now. It's still basically in the same spot it was when the accident took place, and the first responders were trying to determine whether or not it was safe for them to board the ship to then go in and begin their investigation. Clearly something went wrong with the ship. We don't know exactly what it was. There's obviously a lot of speculation online as to whether or not it lost power, if there was some sort of mechanical issue. But that is all something that is still in the very early stages of this investigation.
Yeah, and amazingly, no reports of any injuries on that ship. All right, Ryan Nobles, appreciate your reporting this morning. Thank you. Scandal and what it means for baseball's biggest player. Let's bring in USA Today MLB reporter Gabe Lax. Gabe, good to have you with us. So first of all, what stood out from Otani's statement? Is this what you expected to hear?
Almost 100%. The conviction with which he stated that Mitsuhara stole money from him was notable. And if you're going to go that direction, that's kind of the only way you can go, is with conviction and by saying this is the story and we're sticking to it. Obviously a lot of fans, media, otherwise are disappointed that he did not answer questions and apparently won't for the foreseeable future. And it kind of makes sense that, you would not necessarily say they're using, federal investigations and MLB investigations as a shield, but it does make for a convenient excuse. Well, there is an ongoing investigation or investigations. I can't comment. So I think for now it satisfies folks, but leaves people with a lot of unanswered questions.
What are the top questions you still have that you'd like to hear him answer?
Yeah, more so just how was he not aware of all this? How can a guy that he spends 300 days a year with, how is he not aware of his gambling problem, or with the fact that he might run in these circles, that he might play in a card game with some of his teammates, with somebody who ultimately was a alleged bookmaker? these guys are said to be very close, and that was always the narrative, and it was a Shohei and Ippei, and it was kind of a cool subtext to this superstar and the guy helping him, kind of make his way in America. So it's hard to have that narrative on one end, and then on the other end say, oh, I had no idea about this major portion of his life. And that's feasible. Everybody has secrets, but at the same time, you're just left wondering about the specifics of all that, certainly.
He's just signed the biggest contract in MLB history, becoming the face of the league. Just bigger picture, what does this mean for the MLB this season? And for Otani, what's his reputation, you think, going to be like in baseball here moving forward?
Yeah, definitely not what baseball wants, to say the least. Just because you want this unfettered sort of situation where the guy transitions to a massive media market, one of their biggest brands. The story actually broke in South Korea, where they played 2 regular season games to extend Major League Baseball into a market that loves baseball, that has supplied a lot of great players, South Korea. So really tough for Major League Baseball. For the Dodgers and Otani, his brand, it puts a crimp in it for sure. If this, sort of narrative is able to hold up that he was a victim, then he's probably just fine. And 2, 3, 5 years from now, there might be jokes and stuff and things of that nature, but that will largely have blown over. But that's still a big remaining unanswered question, is if all the investigations turn up that he was an unwitting victim, then I think he'll still be embraced as a face of baseball, as kind of the ambassador for the Dodgers.
Dodgers fans, how are they reacting to this, especially in a year when really the Dodgers are pretty heavy favorites to win it all?
Yeah, it's very preliminary, but I think, people understand that, there's still a lot of unanswered questions. Fans rally around their stars. They close ranks. Look just up the freeway in San Francisco for years. Giants fans ardently supported Barry Bonds when he was the subject of significant PED allegations. So that's going to happen. The Dodger fans were fired up, over the moon, huge expectations for this year, and I don't think that's going to change this that much. They want to win a World Series, and gambling has been tacitly approved by Major League Baseball, by the Supreme Court, by America, basically. So, again, you're going to have situations where it gets into a gray area of legality, illegality, things of that nature. So it's, I think Dodger fans ultimately will be pretty accepting of what went on, short of him, getting tied into this in any other grander way.
All right. Gabe Lax, thanks so much for joining us this morning. Appreciate your time. Coming up, a potential financial lifeline for former President Trump. After the break, the key Wall Street play that could help solve his legal woes. That's next on Morning News Now. We are staying on top of breaking news out of Baltimore. The Francis Scott Key Bridge has collapsed after it was hit by a cargo ship. Right now, search and rescue efforts are underway. It's unclear how many people might be in the water, but sonar and infrared surveillance tools confirm there were several cars in the river. President Biden has been briefed on the collapse. At this point, the White House is ruling out anything nefarious. We're going to continue to follow this breaking story and bring you the latest developments as soon as they come in. The parent company of Donald Trump's social media platform, Truth Social, is making its debut on the stock market today. The move could be just the financial lifeline the former president needs in the face of various lawsuits, with his stake in the company said to be worth billions of dollars. Joining us for more on this, editor-in-chief at Investopedia, Caleb Silver. So walk us through how this works, how Trump might be able to make this even happen.
Yeah, this was a merger with what we call a SPAC, a special purpose acquisition company called the Digital World Acquisition Corp. It was put together to acquire companies and take them public, in this case, very specifically, to take the Trump Media and Technology Group public. That actually goes public on the NASDAQ today, ticker DJT, same as the ex-president's initials. So he owns 60% of the stock in this company, and the trading behind the company that was acquired has been off the hook lately. It's up 180% so far this year. We'll see what happens when it starts trading today, but he does own 60%. That stake could be worth more than $6 billion on paper.
Of course, when we talk about money and the president's need for money, we know that there was nearly $500 million judgment against him yesterday. A New York appeals court slashed it to $175 million. I mean, how much could Trump stand to make from this?
Well, since he owns roughly 60% of the stock in the company, and if the stock goes up, on paper, he owns several $1 billion worth. But the key thing to think about here is that when companies go public, there's a lockup period, Joe, 6 months before insiders can sell their shares. So on paper, he might be worth 3, 4, or 5 billion, depending on where the stock trades today. But he might have to wait 6 months to exercise it. The big caveat there is that the board of this new company may allow him to sell shares earlier. The board is made up of his son and some people that were in his campaign. They may give him a waiver to sell some shares earlier. But if he sells shares and there's aggressive selling, that could depress the value of the stock. So it's a little bit of a conundrum there. We're going to watch how the stock trades today, but there's been a lot of enthusiasm for the company coming together. It almost happened 2 years ago. There's been some regulatory issues. Finally going public today on the NASDAQ. We'll watch what happens.
All right. Caleb Silver, appreciate your time and analysis this morning. Thank you so much. Apple CEO is on a high-profile trip to China. Tim Cook's visit comes as Apple sales have been declining in the country, while China's economy has also been slowing down. NBC News international correspondent Janice Mackey-Freyer has more.
There appears to be this mutual charm offensive underway, with China wooing foreign investors and companies, letting them know that China is open for business again, while at the same time executives, many of them Americans, are wanting to boost their investment in China at a time when the economy is slowing here and geopolitical tensions are rising. Take Apple, for example. Sales have been declining here and some manufacturing has been shifted away. But CEO Tim Cook has been on a tour aimed at giving the message that Apple is still committed to the Chinese market. Cook helped to open Apple's newest store in Shanghai. It drew a big crowd, with some people camping out overnight. It's Apple's 57th store in China.
Every time I come here, I'm reminded that anything is possible here.
But Apple's sales have been falling here, down 24% year over year. U.S.-China tension is part of it, but it's mainly because of competition from Chinese brands.
The iPhone is more expensive than other phone, so I think the people will choose the more cheap one.
Cook said Apple will continue investing in China, in the supply chain, as well as R&D. He arrived here just as the U.S. Justice Department announced its antitrust investigation on Apple. Cook was also among nearly 36 American CEOs invited to attend a business forum here with top Chinese policymakers. Industries focused on everything from chips to pharmaceuticals. China wants to boost investment, which contradicts the increasingly hostile environment toward foreign business. It's no secret the economy is slowing down here. Money is leaving, and Chinese consumers are spending less, if at all. Why is Chinese leadership not doing more to improve the economy if its problems are so well known?
That is the giant puzzle, because you would think that they've had all the information in their hands. But it's possible that Xi Jinping doesn't know. It could be that he doesn't care, that he's all about national security and his political position, and he spends most of his days moving chess pieces around the board of different officials and different ministries and the party and the PLA, and worrying about those kinds of things, and not about growth.
Later this week, a group of American CEOs will meet face-to-face with China's President Xi Jinping, a sign of how seriously Beijing is looking to improve conditions for businesses here and confidence in the economy.
Staying on top of our top story this morning, a major bridge in Baltimore has collapsed. Video captured the moment the Francis Scott Key Bridge plunged in the Patapsco River after it was hit by a cargo ship. Right now, we know the ship was heading to Sri Lanka when authorities say it apparently either lost power or lost its ability to navigate. Officials say a search and rescue effort is underway, and sonar has detected vehicles underwater. Right now, we know at least 7 people are missing. Officials say that number could grow. We do know at least 2 people were rescued from the water. One of them is in serious condition in the hospital. We have teams on the ground working to get you the latest information. We'll bring you any new developments throughout the day as soon as they come in.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.